Hello everybody and welcome back to another 2022 Overwatch League roster breakdown video. Today we're taking a look at the roster for the Vancouver Titans, second to last team for this season. They finished the 2021 season with a 1-15 record, minus 35 map differential, so an identical record and differential to the London Spitfire, but of course the Titans did lose to the London Spitfire in their only head-to-head matchup of the season. And so that resulted in the Spitfire owning the tiebreaker. So basically the same season for these two teams, the Spitfire just slightly better than the Titans. Though the Titans did, of course, get their one win of last season over the Boston Uprising during the Countdown Cup qualifiers. If we take a look at their 2022 roster, I am actually quite a big fan of this 2022 Titans roster. I think there's a lot of good pieces on this roster, some players that I'm a very big fan of and I'm very excited to see in action. So let's very quickly throw this roster up and take a look. As you can see here in the DPS line, they have Aspire, Shockwave, and Psycho. Aspire, of course, coming over from the Toronto Defiant. Shockwave began his career with the Vancouver Titans, went to the Fusion last season, is now back with the Titans. Psycho is a rookie for this team this season. In the support line, they have Masa, Aztac, and Sky Ripa. Masa, of course, coming over from the Atlanta Reign. Aztac coming over from the Toronto Defiant. And Sky Ripa being the lone rookie in that backline. And finally, there is False, who is the lone tank for this team, and he comes in as a rookie. So that's the team we're looking at right now. Pretty solid lineup in my opinion. So let's talk about them and let's go in, starting of course, as always, with the DPS line. I am a big fan of this DPS line, and it really is the thing on this roster that I think I have the most faith in based on the players on this roster and what we've seen from them in the past. They have been very good in the past, these players, and I think it is going to be very interesting to see them on this roster. So let's start, of course, with Aspire. Like I said, coming over from the Toronto Defiant, he joined that team late last season and was one of the best performing players on the roster, excelling on the hit scan role, as well as excelling on the tracer. So definitely a hit scan player for this team, probably the primary hit scan player on this team if I had to guess, and also the primary tracer player. So there will be some crossover between him and Shockwave, of course. Shockwave is another hit scan player, plays a lot of the Widow, a lot of the Ashe, a lot of the Cassidy, so I would expect those two to split playtime in some regards, though, like I said, I think Aspire is primarily going to be this team's tracer player, while I expect Shockwave to play the hit scan alongside Aspire if he is on the tracer. Then they have Psycho, who is their flex DPS player. So he plays stuff like Mei, Pharah, and Echo. Historically, of course, he played Doomfist, but we have now learned that Doomfist is going to be a tank for Overwatch 2 and 2022. So the Doomfist ability to play Doomfist doesn't really mean a whole lot anymore going into the 2022 season if you're a DPS player. Psycho most recently spent time with the Team Falcons Esport. They had an EU version of their team. So he was on Falcons Esport EU. He also spent some time on New Kings and Shoes Money Crew EU in 2021 and 2020. So he has been pretty prevalent in the league. I definitely needed a flex DPS player. Shockwave and Aspire can play some. You know, Aspire plays some Hanzo. Shockwave plays some Echo. So they have some ability to play some of those flex DPS players, or heroes, but neither of them are really known for their Mei or their Pharah. So this is a solid rotation. I was very happy with both Aspire and Shockwave during their time in the Overwatch League, and I think Psycho is a great player to kind of bring in to fill in the holes that they themselves don't fully cover, right? Some of those DPS heroes that they don't play. I had originally kind of expected them to go for EQO, but I think that the signing of Psycho is a very good signing in and of itself, and I think that that's a perfectly fine signing. Covers what they need, and I think really does make this DPS line pretty strong when compared to a lot of the other DPS lineups that have been put together by a lot of these Western teams. This is, in my opinion, one of the best constructed Western DPS lineups I have seen in a while, and so I'm very excited to see this lineup actually kind of play and show out, because I think these are some really good Western players in that DPS line. Moving on to the support line, we do have a Korean player, of course, but we first start with Masa, coming over from the Atlanta Reign, a grand finalist in 2021. Masa is now the oldest player in the Overwatch League, spent 2018, 2019, 2021, 2019, 2020, 2021 with the Atlanta Reign, and now on the Vancouver Titans. Had a very good season last season. It wasn't one of those things where Masa was just kind of like there and present on a team that made it to the grand finals. He was an active participant on that team and played a very important role in that team's success. Now, if double flex support is the meta going into 2022, which is what everyone kind of expects it to be, we could see Masa have a bit of a Moth-like presence from last year's LA Gladiators, where he doesn't really get a ton of playtime. He just kind of ends up sitting primarily on the bench because his hero pool isn't really getting the necessary rounds. Lucio might not get a lot of play, or Mercy might not get a lot of play, and maybe it just becomes better to play their flex supports over Masa. But I do think Masa brings a lot, and if there is a Lucio meta or a Mercy meta, definitely I expect to see a lot of Masa. He also is a strong Brig player, so he's their best Brig player. So if they're going to have a Brig meta, which I think is pretty likely, unlike with the LA Gladiators, where they have Skewed, who is just an absolutely incredible Brigitte that can play Brigitte at a very high level, at a level arguably higher than Moth. I think Masa is the best Brig on this team, and so he will likely be their go-to if that is what the meta calls for. But you also have Aztac and Skyrippa on this roster as double flex supports, though Skyrippa does also play some Mercy a little bit, but primarily these two players play the flex flex support role. I expect Aztac to be the primary player on that role. He, I think, has a more well-rounded hero pool. He can play the Zen, he can play the BAP, and the Ana and Moira at a very high level. They are all pretty good, and obviously he was in the league last season, and he would have been a starter if not for the LA Valiant literally destroying their roster, and Toronto seeing the opportunity to grab Lastro, who is an incredible player in his own right, and just, essentially left Aztac on the bench. But Aztac is still a very good player, someone who definitely is an improvement from what they had last season with Rolf, and I think that he brings a lot of new stuff to this team, and really we're going to see some way stronger flexible play out of their backline than we were in 2020 and 2021 because of Aztac coming over from the Defiant. And of course Aztac played with Aspire, which helps as well. We have some pre-existing synergy already now with two of the players on this team who have Overwatch League level synergy, have played together. They're not the only players I think that have played together, though I could be wrong, and the more I think about it, I think that is not actually the case. I think they're the only two players that have played together before, so that is an important part, especially when it's one of your only Korean player on this roster. I think it helps to have him, have played with somebody on this roster in the past, and so I think that's good to see Aztac and Aspire coming over together to this team. The other player, of course, is Skyrippa, coming out of Romania. Spent a lot of time on British Hurricane, going back to 2021. Spent some time with Young and Beautiful and Obey Alliance and Raspberry Racers, Clockwork Vendetta, a lot of different teams in European contenders over the past couple of years, but he now makes his way to the Overwatch League thanks to his performance there. I expect him to be the guy that they play really only in double flex support metas. I think Aztac is going to be the primary flex support on this team. I think he's going to be the main guy they roll with. I just think that they want to have another option in case there's a double flex support meta, or just in case they figure out that that's the best option they have. Maybe down the stretch, Skyrippa starts outplaying Aztec, and so they go with Aztec over him, or they go with him over Aztec. Who knows? But I think it is more likely that we see the most out of Aztec for this roster, because I think he is the better talent, but I think it's pretty close. And I think we'll see, based on the trends that other teams have been choosing to follow with going primarily for double flex supports, I think it seems pretty likely that we will see quite a bit of both of them. So that's really my kind of takeaway for the support line. I think it's a solid support line, especially by having a veteran player like Massa really kind of leading this team from the back line. That's something that I felt like the Titans were missing. Is just someone who's not just a veteran, but a veteran who's been in those really, really, really big games. Obviously, they had Friedwiener last season. He did have some good, playoff performances, and he's been in some of those areas. But I think that Massa is a much more kind of higher up in terms of the overall level of talent that he is in terms of his role than something like Friedwiener is. And I think that Massa brings in more of a veteran leadership figure type of role than what Friedwiener did. So I am very excited to see Massa on this roster. Hope he doesn't get the moth treatment, but only time will tell at this point. Finally, as we move on to the tanks, they only have one tank currently on the roster, and that is False, the only Canadian on this team. Spent a long time, of course, with the American Tornado guys in 2021. Was on there from February through July of 2021. Then he went to Maryville Esports and Bobby Wasabi, spending time there on both of those teams, going into contenders and following some of the other guys from American Tornado. Not all of them, obviously. They kind of all separate in different ways. I assume this team has another tank lined up. It would be strange to me if they went only with False. I know of False only for his flex tank play and or off tank play. So I don't really know if there are that many tanks out there that are really good at both of them, and I'm not familiar with False's main tank play to know if that is something that they believe he has the ability to do. But I am pretty sure that they are going to sign a main tank, because I don't think that False is going to give them everything that they would need in the tank role. I think he's very good on the off-tank heroes. His D.Va, his Sigma, his Zarya, definitely very, very good. He played on American Tornado. He played on an incredibly dominant team that dominated contenders for a very long time. And so I would expect quite a bit out of him as he plays for the Vancouver Titans, but I don't think he is a well-rounded enough player to be the only tank that they have on the roster. So I hope they sign another tank. My opinions on this roster are essentially based on the idea and hope that they do decide to sign another tank. Obviously, they could make the decision not to. I just think that would be the wrong decision, personally, and I don't think that is the one that they will make, because I think they also recognize that that is not the right decision. But overall, I like this roster a lot. I think this is a very talented roster with a mix of very good kind of young veterans as well as some, young talented rookies. And then you have someone like Massa, who's been around a long time, brings that leadership figure, leadership type of, personality and character to this roster. I've been a very, harsh critic of the Titans for a while. I've never been a fan of this team, this organization, really, just for a number of reasons. And of course, what happened several years ago was pretty messed up. That was not a huge positive moment. But I think this roster is a significant improvement from what they had last season. I feel way better about this roster. They held on to too many parts last season that I think didn't work. And I think that this season they cleaned house. They didn't hold on to a single player from their 2021 campaign. And they brought in a lot of really talented players. A lot of really good players that I genuinely think bring a lot more strong play to this team. I think this team will be an overall better roster as a result. I think this team will be significantly better than what we saw from them in 2021. This is a team that I think is scary, has upset potential. I think they're a very similar team to what we saw from Paris last season, where they just have that level of play, that level of explosiveness and talent, where I think that they can win games against very good teams. Now, the Western region is difficult. There are a lot of good teams. I don't think this roster is among the best. But when you compare them to rosters where I think you're going to be asking who they're similar to, and you look at teams like Boston and London and Paris and Florida, and potentially like Toronto and New York, I think they're kind of in the upper echelon of those teams. I think they're probably not as good as Toronto and New York and Paris, but I think they're pretty close with a team like Boston. And they could even be on Paris level, right? Like that to me is kind of where they are right now. So they're definitely fighting for a spot in the NA playoffs and NA play-ins, and they definitely have a shot at making those tournaments, but I don't expect them to do it in a very like noticeable, significant fashion early on. I think it'll take some time, potentially before we kind of really start to understand this team. But I do think this is a good team. I do think this is a team that has a lot of potential and could be very, very good. And so I'm excited to see what this team is in 2022. Let me know your thoughts on this Titans roster down below. Do you agree with me that they are a much improved roster from last season, or do you think that this roster is still going to be a bit of a bottom level, lower tier team? Love to hear from you in the comments down below. But that's going to be all from me for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.